coffee was still warm when everything went quiet. I mean, not quiet. Static. Loud, angry static where the morning news should have been, crackling through our kitchen radio like when you drive under those big power lines, except it wouldn't stop. Wouldn't stop. My spouse kept jabbing at the dial, clockwise, counterclockwise, nothing but white noise and that metallic taste creeping into my mouth. You know that taste? Like sucking on pennies. Must be the storm, I said, because there'd been talk of weather. Rain. Heavy stuff moving in from the west. But the sky outside was clear. Blue-white clear, the kind that makes you squint. Wrong kind of clear, like looking through thick glass. The digital clock on the microwave kept blinking midnight. Power surge, maybe? Had to be 6:15, maybe 6:20. I'd been awake long enough to start the coffee, check the weather app on my phone. Except my phone was dead. Completely dead, wouldn't even turn on. Was it earlier? The light seemed wrong. Too bright for dawn, too sharp, too clean. We should go, my spouse said, switching channels on the TV remote. Black screen. Not even static, just dead black. They tried the power button. Nothing. Something's not right. It's probably just. The neighbor's dog stopped barking. Mid-bark, like someone hit a mute button. Through our kitchen window, I could see the Hendersons' yard. Their motion sensor lights were flickering on and off, like a broken strobe. Solar-powered ones, the kind that store energy during the day. But they were cycling wrong, too fast, like they were confused about whether it was day or night. Nothing. I pressed my face against the glass. The street lights were still on. Wasn't it past sunrise? The LED bulbs pulsed weak and yellow, like they were running on emergency power. Failing emergency power. The newspaper should have been on our driveway by now. The Johnsons should have been backing out of their garage, coffee mugs steaming on their dashboard. But the street was empty. Cars sat in driveways like abandoned toys. Where is everyone? My spouse was pulling at the front door now, testing the deadbolt like they'd forgotten how locks work. I'm calling Mom. She lives closer to downtown, maybe her landline. The phones are down too. I'd already tried. Cell towers, landlines, even that old CB radio gathering dust in the garage, dead air, every channel. Just that same persistent hum in my ears, like tinnitus but deeper. Mechanical, like machinery grinding in the distance. This isn't a drill, they said. Remember the emergency broadcasts they tested last month? The ones about nuclear readiness? Those silent watchers people online kept saying the government was preparing for something. I laughed. Had to laugh. Nuclear? Come on. This is Millfield. Population 12,000. We're nobody. Who'd waste a nuke on? The radio crackled. Not static this time. A voice. Distant, like it was traveling through miles of interference, but human. Official. Rehearsed. Temporary interruption in regional communications following an isolated electromagnetic pulse event. Residents are advised to remain indoors and await further instructions. This is not a test. Repeat, this is not a test. The signal wavered, distorted. Situation is contained. No cause for immediate alarm. Authorities are investigating the source of this localized incident. Then it cut to static. But underneath the white noise, barely audible, I caught something else. A name. General Cade confirms minimal impact assessment. The transmission died completely. See? Electromagnetic pulse. EMP, probably just a solar flare or something. I was talking too fast, the words tumbling out. They happen all the time. Knock out electronics for a few hours, but it's harmless. Totally harmless. They said contained, right? Minimal impact. My spouse stared at me. Solar flares don't taste like metal, and they don't make the air shimmer. They were right. That penny copper tang was getting stronger, coating the back of my throat like I'd been chewing aluminum foil. And my hands, when had they started shaking? Outside, there was definitely something wrong with the air. A faint distortion, like heat waves rising from summer asphalt, but it was a cool April morning. I'm checking on your mother, my spouse said, grabbing the car keys from the hook by the door. Wait, I caught their arm. What if it's not safe out there? What if that shimmer in the air is radiation or something? What if she's hurt? What if she needs help? What if she's sitting there waiting for someone to come? The car keys felt warm in my palm when I took them. Too warm. The car might not start. EMP fries electronics, right? Modern cars are all computerized. Then we walk. It's only 3 miles. 3 miles through whatever had turned our neighborhood into a ghost town. 3 miles breathing that metallic air, walking under that too bright sky. But it was their mother, my mother-in-law, who made terrible coffee and insisted on handwritten thank you notes and always asked about my job at the insurance office like it mattered. The radio hissed. For a second, just a second, I thought I heard something else underneath the static. A rhythmic clicking, like a Geiger counter in an old Cold War movie. Click, click, click. But that was impossible. This was Millfield, Missouri. This was Tuesday morning. This was coffee cooling on the counter and a newspaper that should have been delivered and neighbors who should have been walking their dogs. This wasn't Chernobyl. This wasn't Hiroshima. This wasn't the end of the world. We wait, I said, setting the keys back on their hook. We wait for official instructions. There's protocols for this stuff. Emergency management, FEMA, all that. They'll restore the power grid, fix the communications. The broadcast said the situation is contained. We just have to be patient. Patient? My spouse's voice cracked. The Hendersons haven't come out of their house. The Johnsons' porch light has been on all night. Their electric bill obsession would never let that happen normally. And look, they pointed through the living room window. Mrs. Patterson's sprinkler system is running, but she disconnected it last week for the season. I tried to remember the last time I'd actually seen any of them. Yesterday evening? Mrs. Patterson deadheading her tulips. No, that was Sunday. Or was it Saturday? The memory felt slippery, like trying to hold water in cupped hands. Time was doing something strange, stretching and compressing. Had we been standing in this kitchen for 10 minutes or 3 hours? It's just a drill, I whispered, but the words felt hollow. It has to be. They're testing our response. Emergency preparedness. Remember those silent watchers people online kept posting about government drills? My spouse looked at me like I'd grown a second head. Government drills don't make the air taste like copper and smell like burnt ozone. They were right. There was a smell now, creeping through the window seals despite them being closed. Sharp and electric, like the moment after lightning strikes too close. Like the aftermath of something terrible. The radio clicked. Once, twice, 3 times. Then silence. And in that clicking, in that tiny, desperate sound, I heard something that made my stomach drop. Not a Geiger counter. Not static interference. A heartbeat. Mechanical and steady and wrong. But we stayed in the kitchen. Because moving meant acknowledging that whatever had happened was real. Because staying meant we could pretend this was temporary, fixable, normal. Because some truths are too big for Tuesday morning coffee and failed electronics. Because sometimes the end of the world sounds exactly like nothing at all. Except for the clicking, and the taste of metal, and the smell of burnt sky. For hours and 17 minutes until the first ash particles settle on Maple Street. The car started. Shouldn't have, but it did. Old reliable 98 Honda with more rust than paint and an engine that predated the computer revolution. No fancy electronics to fry. Just pistons and cylinders and the kind of mechanical stubbornness that survives electromagnetic pulses. Thank God, my spouse breathed, sliding into the passenger seat. See? Everything's fine. We're overthinking this. But the radio was dead. Had been dead since we'd left the house 20 minutes ago. Or was it 40? Time kept slipping sideways, moments telescoping and collapsing like an accordion. The dashboard clock blinked midnight, same as the microwave. Same as every digital display we'd seen. The streets looked wrong in daylight. Not empty, abandoned. Cars sat in driveways with their doors hanging open, like people had gotten out mid-conversation and just walked away. The Henderson house had all its lights on, upstairs and down, burning electricity in broad daylight. Solar panels on the Martinez roof were sparking, little blue-white flashes that made my teeth ache. Stop here, I said, pulling up to the corner where Elm intersects Main. I want to try something. I'd spotted it from 3 blocks away. The old emergency broadcast tower, the kind they used for weather alerts and amber alerts, and those monthly tests that always made the dog hide under the kitchen table. Thick steel lattice rising 150 feet above the Dairy Queen, red warning lights blinking. No, not blinking. Strobing. Fast and erratic, like a panicked heartbeat. The rule was simple: stay near communication towers after an EMP. They're hardened against electromagnetic interference, built to survive solar flares and geomagnetic storms. I'd read that somewhere. Popular Mechanics? A government pamphlet? The memory felt solid, reliable. Like fact. But as I got closer to the chain-link fence surrounding the tower base, doubt crept in. The metal was humming. Not electrical humming, mechanical humming, like something inside the concrete foundation was spinning, grinding, working overtime. The fencing was warm against my palms, almost hot. Wait, was I remembering the rule correctly? Something nagged at me, a half-formed thought about towers being dangerous after EMPs, not safe. Focal points for residual energy. But that couldn't be right, could it? This isn't right, my spouse said, but they were already scanning radio frequencies on the Honda's ancient AM/FM. Static on every channel except. Isolated electromagnetic event has been contained. Citizens are advised to remain in their homes and await further instruction. Repeat, this is not a test. The situation is under control. Emergency services are responding to reports of localized power failures. The signal was stronger here, clearer. Official. Reassuring. Exactly what we needed to hear. There, I said. See? They're handling it. Emergency services are on the way. We just need to go home and wait. But my spouse kept turning the dial. That's the same recording from this morning. Word for word. They're just looping it. So, maybe they don't have new information yet. Maybe they're still assessing the situation. Listen. They found another frequency. Different voice, same message. Then another channel, another voice, but the script was identical down to the pauses and inflections. Like actors reading from the same prompt. That doesn't mean anything. They probably have protocols. The radio crackled. For just a moment, the official message cut out, replaced by something else. Rushed, panicked, barely above a whisper. Safe zones are compromised, repeat, do not proceed to designated evacuation points. Radiation levels at Memorial Stadium are climbing. They're herding people into. Static swallowed the transmission. When it cleared, we were back to the reassuring loop. Situation is under control. Emergency services are responding. My hands were shaking again. The penny taste was stronger now, metallic and sharp, like I'd bitten my tongue. Did you hear that? About radiation? There's no radiation. You said yourself, it's just an EMP, solar flare. Harmless electromagnetic interference. But I was remembering something else now. The doubt crystallizing into certainty. You don't stay near communication towers after an EMP, you avoid them. They become focal points for residual electromagnetic energy. Dangerous. Potentially lethal. So where had I learned the opposite? When had that false information lodged in my brain? The memory felt planted, artificial, like propaganda disguised as fact. We need to get away from here, I said, but my spouse was already turning the key. The Honda coughed, sputtered, died. Tried again, nothing. The engine that had survived 40 years of neglect and 3 teenagers learning to drive had finally given up. Must be vapor lock, they said. Heat from the engine. It'll cool down. But the hood wasn't warm. I popped it anyway, stared at the ancient V6 like I had any idea what I was looking for. Everything looked normal. Dirty but functional. No obvious damage from electromagnetic interference. Except for the smell. It was faint at first, masked by the usual car odors, oil, coolant, accumulated road grime. But there was something else underneath. Something sharp and chemical and wrong. Like burnt plastic mixed with ozone, and that penny metal taste that wouldn't leave my mouth. We walk, my spouse decided. It's only 2 miles from here. We can cut through the industrial district, stay off the main roads. The industrial district, where the old grain silos cast long shadows and the railroad tracks ran parallel to the chemical plant. Where the emergency sirens had been silent since this morning, even though protocol dictated they should be blaring nonstop during any kind of regional emergency. I wanted to argue, wanted to insist we wait for the car to cool down, for official help to arrive, for this whole nightmare to resolve itself with a reasonable explanation, and maybe an apologetic news conference about technical difficulties and solar flare interference. But the radio tower was getting louder. That mechanical grinding had become a shriek, like massive gears stripping just below the threshold of human hearing. The air around the fence was shimmering, not heat distortion, but something else. Something that made my eyes water and my skin prickle with static electricity. We started walking. The industrial district looked like a movie set after the crew had gone home. Loading docks stood empty, semi-trailers abandoned mid-delivery. The chemical plant's cooling towers vented steam into that too bright sky, but the parking lot was deserted. Shift change should have happened hours ago. Where were the workers? Maybe they evacuated, my spouse said when I voiced the question. Maybe they got word earlier than we did. Without telling anyone else? Without sounding the emergency sirens? We were walking faster now, our footsteps echoing off concrete and corrugated metal. The smell was stronger here, that burnt plastic ozone cocktail, but with something organic underneath. Something rotten and sweet that made my stomach turn. I pulled out my phone to check the time, then remembered it was dead. Had been dead since morning. How long had we been walking? The sun was directly overhead now, casting short shadows that seemed too sharp, too dark. But it felt like we'd been moving for hours. There. My spouse pointed toward a cluster of buildings ahead. That's downtown. We can see Mom's apartment complex from the bridge. The bridge. A simple concrete span over Murder Creek, named by some frontier settler with a dark sense of humor, not because anything terrible had actually happened there. I'd driven over it 1,000 times, walked across it as a teenager when walking anywhere seemed like freedom. But when we reached the midpoint and looked toward the city center, everything was wrong. The downtown skyline was intact, office buildings, the old courthouse, the new hospital with its distinctive glass facade. But the glass was dark, not reflecting sunlight the way it should, but absorbing it like a sponge. And the streets? Where are the cars? My spouse whispered. They were right. The arterial roads that should have been clogged with confused traffic, emergency vehicles, National Guard trucks, empty. Completely empty. Like everyone in a city of 60,000 had simply vanished. Except for the smoke. Thin columns rising from various points across the urban landscape. Not the black smoke of fires, but pale wisps that caught the light wrong. Iridescent. Prismatic. Like oil on water, but made of air. Industrial accidents, I said, but my voice sounded hollow even to me. Chemical releases from the power outage. Safety systems offline. It happens. My spouse was staring at something else. Look at the hospital. The medical center's emergency department should have been chaos. Ambulances, helicopters, trauma teams dealing with whatever injuries came from a regional power failure. Instead, the emergency bay doors were closed. The helipad was empty. No movement behind the windows. But the building was glowing. Not brightly, just a faint phosphorescence around the edges, like someone had outlined it with luminescent paint. The kind of glow you see on deep-sea fish, or those toys kids play with in dark rooms. Beautiful and completely impossible. We need to get to Mom's, my spouse said, but they weren't moving. We were both frozen on that bridge, staring at a city that had become something from a science fiction movie. The radio in my pocket, the little emergency one I'd grabbed from the kitchen drawer before leaving home, crackled to life. Not the reassuring official loop, but something else. General Cade confirms the operation was successful. All primary targets contained. Collateral damage within acceptable parameters. Phase 2 authorization requested. Static consumed the transmission. When it cleared, we were back to the automated message about staying indoors and awaiting instruction. Did that say targets? My spouse asked. Did it say operation? I was fumbling with the radio, trying to find that frequency again when I heard it. Distant but unmistakable, coming from the direction of downtown. Clicking. Not the mechanical rhythm I'd imagined in our kitchen that morning. This was organic, irregular, like hundreds of insects tapping against glass. But louder. Much louder. And getting closer. We should go back, I said. The car might start now. We can wait at home for what? For whoever conducted a successful operation against primary targets to come knocking on our door. They were right, but admitting it meant acknowledging that the safe, reasonable world I had been clinging to had already ended. That the reassuring broadcasts were lies. That whatever had caused this morning's electromagnetic pulse wasn't natural or accidental or temporary. That we were on our own in a city that glowed in the wrong places and smelled like burnt ozone and rang with the sound of invisible insects celebrating something terrible. The clicking was definitely getting closer. Mom's apartment is 12 blocks, my spouse said. If we cut through the rail yard backs up to the chemical plant. If there's been some kind of leak, then we hold our breath and run fast. It was a terrible plan, but it was the only plan we had, because going back meant admitting defeat, and going forward meant facing whatever was making that clicking sound in a city that had become a ghost town painted with light. We started running. Behind us, the radio towers humming rose to a shriek that made my fillings ache. Ahead of us, the clicking grew louder, more complex, like a symphony of typewriters operated by drunk pianists. And somewhere in the distance, carried on that chemical-tainted wind, I caught a fragment of another pirate transmission. Safe zones are traps. The ash is coming. Don't trust the glow. Don't trust Cades. Static swallowed the warning, but it didn't matter. We were already committed to the terrible mathematics of survival. 12 blocks through a contaminated city to reach someone who might already be dead in whatever trap they'd disguised as safety. The clicking followed us every step of the way. 3 hours and 41 minutes until the first ash particles settle on Maple Street. 6 minutes until we discover what's been making that sound. The clicking wasn't insects. I realized this when we reached the rail yard and saw them in the failing afternoon light. Dozens of handheld radiation detectors scattered across the gravel between the tracks. Geiger counters, still functional despite the EMP, still running on their internal batteries, all of them screaming the same desperate warning in electronic Morse code. Click, 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 click. Pause. Click, 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 click. The sound of invisible death announcing itself in 4/4 time. Jesus Christ, my spouse breathed, pulling their shirt up over their nose and mouth. How many rads is that? I didn't know. Had never learned the conversion between clicks per minute and actual danger. But I knew the sound meant we were walking through a radioactive field, breathing contaminated air, absorbing gamma rays through our skin with every step. The terrible part? It felt like nothing. No burning, no immediate sickness, no obvious signs of cellular damage. Just the penny taste getting stronger and a growing exhaustion that might have been fear, or might have been the first stages of acute radiation syndrome. We have to go back, I said, but my spouse was already pointing toward the far end of the yard. Look, a figure in what looked like a hazmat suit was collecting the Geiger counters, dropping them into a reinforced container marked with radiation warnings. Moving methodically, efficiently, like someone cleaning up evidence. Hey, my spouse shouted. Hey, we need help. The figure looked up. Not a hazmat suit, military gear. Full CBRN protection with rank insignia barely visible through the face shield. The soldier raised one hand in what could have been a greeting or a warning to stay back, then spoke into a radio mounted on their chest. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read body language. Tense. Urgent. The kind of communication that happens when protocols are failing and improvisation becomes survival. The soldier finished their transmission and jogged toward us, Geiger counter container balanced against one hip. Even through the protective gear, I could see youth, maybe 22, 23. Old enough to follow orders, young enough to still believe the orders made sense. Sir, ma'am, you need to evacuate this area immediately. The voice came through a speaker, tinny but clear. Radiation levels exceed safe exposure limits. Radiation, my spouse laughed, actual laughter, high and sharp with hysteria. We were told it was just an EMP, solar flare. Technical difficulties. The soldier's helmet tilted slightly. Behind the face shield, I caught a glimpse of confusion. Ma'am, who told you that? The emergency broadcasts. Every station, every frequency. They said the situation was under control. Emergency services were responding. Ma'am, emergency services have been suspended. All civilian personnel were evacuated from the contamination zone at 0800 hours. The soldier checked something on their wrist display. That was 7 hours ago. 7 hours. We'd been wandering through a radioactive wasteland for 7 hours, following false information, breathing poisoned air, while everyone else had been safely evacuated. Everyone except us. Why didn't we get the evacuation order? I asked. The soldier's radio crackled. A voice I couldn't quite make out, but the tone was unmistakable, angry, authoritative, impatient. The young soldier stiffened. Base, this is Echo 7. I have 2 civilians in Sector Delta 5. Request permission to escort to decontamination facility. Static. Then, Echo 7, what is your current grid reference? The soldier read off a string of numbers and letters. More static, then a different voice. Older. Colder. Echo 7, you are ordered to complete evidence collection and return to base immediately. Do not engage with unauthorized personnel. Sir, these civilians require immediate medical attention. That is a direct order, soldier. Evidence collection only. No civilian contact. My spouse grabbed my arm. Evidence collection, they whispered. They're covering something up. The soldier was facing a choice I recognized from every war movie I'd ever seen. Follow orders or follow conscience. Through the face shield, I could see the internal struggle playing out in real time. Sir, the soldier said into their radio, I need clarification on rules of engagement for contaminated civilians. There are no contaminated civilians in your sector, Echo 7. Your area was successfully evacuated. Complete your mission and return to base. The soldier's hand moved to their sidearm. Not threatening, nervous, like someone realizing they'd stumbled into a situation with no good options. "Listen," I said, stepping closer. "We don't understand what's happening here. This morning we woke up to dead electronics. No phone, no internet, no power. But the radio said it was just technical difficulties. Solar flare. We were told to stay home and wait." "The radio said what?" "Emergency broadcast system. Official announcements. They said emergency services were responding. Situation under control. Remain in your homes." I pulled out the emergency radio, still crackling with that reassuring loop. "Here. Listen." The soldier took the radio with gloved hands, held it close to their helmet speaker. Their body language changed as they listened, confusion shifting to something harder, angrier. This is completely wrong," they said finally. "These aren't official emergency broadcasts. This is." They paused, choosing words carefully. "This is what we call deliberate disinformation." The radio crackled again. "Echo 7, report your status." The soldier looked at us, then at the radio, then back at us. When they spoke into their chest mic, their voice was different. Flatter. More military. "Base, this is Echo 7. Evidence collection complete. No civilian contact. Returning to checkpoint Alpha." But they didn't move toward the checkpoint. Instead, they pulled us behind a derailed grain car, out of sight from whatever surveillance was tracking their movements. "Listen carefully," they said, voice low and urgent. "You're not supposed to be here. No one is supposed to be here. This whole area was evacuated this morning before the..." They stopped, shook their head. "Before the incident." "What incident?" my spouse demanded. "I can't. Look, I'm just following orders. But those broadcasts you've been hearing? They're not from emergency services. They're from..." Another pause, longer this time. "They're designed to keep people in the contamination zone." The words hit me like cold water. Keep people in? Why would anyone want to keep people in a radiation zone? The soldier's radio buzzed with increasing urgency. Multiple voices now, overlapping commands, position reports, someone mentioning missing personnel and sector sweep. "I have to go," the soldier said. "But listen, whatever you do, don't go to any of the safe zones mentioned in those broadcasts. Memorial Stadium, the high school, the community center. They're not safe. They're what? Collection points." The soldier was already moving, heading back toward their original position. But they turned back one last time. "If you want the truth, find the real emergency broadcast center. KQD transmission station, 15 miles north on Highway 6. If anyone's still telling the truth, it'll be there." Then they were gone, jogging back to collect the last few Geiger counters before someone noticed their delayed return. My spouse and I crouched behind that grain car as the implications settled in. The reassuring broadcasts were lies. The safe zones were traps. Emergency services weren't coming because they'd already evacuated everyone except us. Except the people who'd been deliberately kept behind. "Why?" my spouse whispered. "Why would they want people to stay in a contamination zone?" I thought about the soldier's word choice. Collection points. Not evacuation centers or refugee camps. Collection points. Like something you'd use for specimens. For test subjects. For guinea pigs. The radio in my hands crackled with another update. Citizens are reminded that evacuation is not necessary. The situation remains under control. Please proceed to your nearest designated safe zone for additional information and supplies. Memorial Stadium, where the panicked voice had warned us about climbing radiation levels, where they were hurting people. "We need to get to that transmission station," I said. 15 miles? Through this?" My spouse gestured at the Geiger counters still clicking their warnings across the rail yard. "We'll be dead before we make it halfway." They were probably right. But staying meant accepting that we were test subjects in someone's experiment. Going meant facing radiation sickness, contaminated terrain, and whatever military units were collecting evidence of an incident that officially hadn't happened. The radio crackled again. This time, the voice was different, older, more authoritative. The kind of voice that expected to be obeyed without question. "This is General Cade with an update on today's isolated electromagnetic event. I want to personally assure all citizens that the situation is fully contained. Emergency services are operating at full capacity. For your safety and the safety of your families, please proceed immediately to your designated safe zone. Buses will be provided for transport to temporary housing facilities. General Cade." The name from the intercepted transmission we'd heard hours ago. The man who'd authorized the successful operation against primary targets. Temporary housing facilities, my spouse repeated. Jesus, they're not even trying to hide it anymore. Above us, the sky was changing. The too bright blue was fading to an odd greenish tint, and what I'd first taken for clouds were starting to look more like dust. Settling dust, catching the light in prismatic spirals that would have been beautiful if they weren't radioactive. The first ash particles, just like the pirate transmission had warned. We had maybe an hour before the fallout made surface travel impossible. An hour to decide between the false safety of a collection point and the probable death of a 15-mile hike through contaminated wilderness. The decision was made for us when we heard vehicles approaching from the direction of downtown. Military trucks moving in formation, heading for the rail yard, coming to collect their evidence and any unauthorized personnel they might have missed. Run, my spouse said. We ran. Behind us, the Geiger counters continued their electronic requiem. Ahead of us, Highway 6 stretched north through farmland that glowed with settling ash. And somewhere in between, General Cade's collection teams were methodically erasing every trace of an incident that had never officially happened. The truth was 15 miles away. The ash was falling faster now. We ran toward both. We never made it to the transmission station. 2 miles out from the rail yard, my spouse collapsed. Not the stumbling exhaustion of a long walk. This was different. Complete system failure. Legs giving out, consciousness flickering like a dying bulb. The kind of collapse that happens when radiation has fried enough cells that your body simply stops cooperating. I dragged them to the roadside, their dead weight impossible to carry, and checked for signs I didn't want to find. Bleeding from the nose, bruising under the skin, the metallic smell of internal hemorrhaging, acute radiation syndrome, stage 3. I knew because I'd been Googling symptoms on my dead phone for the past hour, muscle memory scrolling through blank screens while my brain refused to accept that the internet was gone, that everything was gone, that we were dying alone on a country highway while radioactive ash settled in our hair like gray snow. How long? My spouse whispered, blood speckling their lips. I didn't answer because I'd learned not to make promises about time. The medical websites I'd memorized on my dead phone said stage 3 could last hours or days. But those websites assumed medical intervention for fluids, blood transfusions. Things that didn't exist on Highway 6 with radioactive ash falling like toxic snow. The ash was knee-deep now, drifted against abandoned cars and road signs like radioactive snow. Each particle a microscopic nuclear reactor, still fissioning, still pumping out gamma rays that pass through our bodies like invisible bullets. Beautiful in the fading light, prismatic, almost crystalline. Deadly beautiful. There, my spouse pointed weakly toward lights visible through the gray curtain of fallout. Not military lights. Warm yellow windows, like someone still lived here, still had generator power, still existed in a pocket of the world where radiation was just a word in a physics textbook. I half-carried, half-dragged my spouse toward those lights because abandonment wasn't an option. Because dying together felt better than dying alone. Because maybe despite every law of physics and biology, someone had figured out how to survive what was killing us one cell at a time. The lights belonged to a farmhouse surrounded by what had been cornfields. The crops were gone, not harvested, incinerated. Black stalks jetting through the ash like cemetery markers, testifying to temperatures that could flash cook living tissue in milliseconds. The house looked impossibly normal. Porch light glowing, windows radiating warmth, chimney releasing a thin stream of smoke. If you ignored the radioactive ash covering everything like toxic snow, you could pretend this was just another evening in farm country. If you were very good at pretending. Anyone there? I called, my voice muffled by the strange acoustics of falling fallout. Please, we need help. My spouse was getting heavier with each step, consciousness flickering in and out like a damaged radio signal. Blood from their nose had frozen in the ash-laden air, creating dark icicles on their chin. The porch light blinked. Not electrical failure, deliberate signaling. Seconds later, the front door opened and someone appeared backlit against the interior warmth. Jesus Christ, get them inside. A voice called, male older, with the urgent competence of someone who dealt with agricultural accidents and livestock emergencies. Quick now, but don't shake off that ash near the house. It'll contaminate the air intake. Up close, the house revealed its modifications. Every window sealed with plastic sheeting and duct tape. Fresh weather stripping around the door frame. Makeshift ventilation systems humming in the eaves. Someone had transformed this farmhouse into a survival shelter with whatever materials they could scavenge. The man at the door was maybe 60, wearing coveralls over what looked like multiple layers of clothing. A surgical mask covered his nose and mouth. Behind him, I glimpsed other people, adults and children, all masked, all watching us with the wary compassion reserved for wounded animals that might be carrying disease. "Inside," the man said. "We'll get you cleaned up." The interior was a maze of plastic sheeting and improvised air filtration. Battery-powered fans moved air through furnace filters that had been duct-taped into every conceivable configuration. A Geiger counter sat on the kitchen table, its clicking steady but not frantic, elevated, dangerous but not immediately lethal. "Set them down here," a woman's voice directed, pointing to chairs that had been wrapped in garbage bags. "Don't let them touch anything else until we get that contamination scrubbed off." They had developed a system born of desperate necessity. Spray bottles filled with soapy water that reeked of bleach. Towels that went immediately into sealed plastic bags after use. A waste container marked with hand-drawn radiation symbols, already overflowing with contaminated clothing and cleaning materials. "My spus. I started to explain, then stopped. What was there to explain? That we were dying? That radiation had cooked us from the inside, while we walked through an outdoor laboratory disguised as a natural disaster? "I can see," the woman said gently, efficiently cleaning blood from my spouse's face. "We'll do what we can." "You're farmers?" I asked as they worked, trying not to think about how much radioactive dust they were washing off our skin. "Were," the man said. "Name's Earl. This is my wife Helen, our son Jake, daughter-in-law Maya, granddaughter Lily. We've been holed up here since this morning, listening to the broadcasts." "The official ones or the real ones?" my spouse asked. Helen and Earl exchanged glances. "Both," Helen said. "That's how we figured out something was wrong. The official broadcasts kept saying everything was fine, stay home, don't evacuate. But we've got a ham radio set up in the basement, and we were hearing something completely different on emergency frequencies." "What kind of different?" "Mass casualty event," Jake said from where he was monitoring the Geiger counter. "Multiple cities hit. Military units on full alert. And something about collection operations. The same thing the young soldier had mentioned. Collection points. You folks try to get to one of those safe zones?" Earl asked. "We were heading for the transmission station," I said. "KQD. A soldier told us we might find real information there." Maya laughed, not humor, just exhaustion. "KQD went off the air about 3 hours ago. Last transmission was a reporter saying they were being evacuated for their own safety by military personnel." "So what do we do?" my spouse asked. The question we'd all been avoiding. The question with no good answer. Earl sat down heavily in his own garbage bag-covered chair. "We survive," he said. "Day by day, hour by hour. We've got food, water, batteries. The house is sealed as best we can manage. Radio's still working, so we can monitor what's happening out there. But the radiation will kill us eventually," Helen finished. "Probably, but not today. Maybe not tomorrow. And maybe someone will figure out how to help us before it does." She said it matter-of-factly, the way she might discuss weather or crop prices. The kind of acceptance that comes from living close to forces beyond your control. Drought, flood, economic collapse, and now radioactive ash falling from the sky. Little Lily looked up from her coloring book. She'd been so quiet I'd almost forgotten she was there. "Grandma, are we going to die?" The adults all tensed, waiting for Helen's answer. What do you tell a 10-year-old about radiation sickness? About military cover-ups? About collection points designed to round up contaminated civilians? "Sweetie," Helen said, her voice steady and warm, "we're all going to die someday. But not today. Today we're safe, we're together, and we're taking care of each other. That's what matters." The child nodded and went back to her coloring. Adults needed complex explanations for horror. Children just needed to know someone was still in charge. The ham radio crackled from the basement. Jake went to check it, returning a few minutes later with news. "There's a group in the state capitol organizing some kind of resistance, I guess. People who escaped the collection points, people who figured out the official broadcasts were lies. They're calling themselves the Silent Watchers. The name from the original conspiracy broadcast we'd heard this morning, before we'd known how real it all was. They're trying to get real information out," Jake continued. "Document what actually happened. Get word to the outside world about the cover-up." "Outside world?" my spouse asked. "This wasn't just us," Maya said quietly. "The ham radio traffic suggests multiple cities were hit. Coordinated. This was planned. Planned. Not an accident. Not a technical malfunction or rogue missile. A deliberate attack disguised as a series of unfortunate incidents. General Cade, I said. Earl's head snapped up. You know that name? We heard it on intercepted military communications. He was giving authorization for something called successful operations against primary targets. Jesus, Earl breathed. You don't suppose? Don't suppose what? That it was our own people? The possibility hung in the air like the radioactive ash outside. That this wasn't foreign terrorism or technical failure. That American military personnel had deliberately targeted American cities. That General Cade was conducting some kind of experiment or demonstration using civilian populations as test subjects. It would explain the false broadcasts, the collection points, the systematic effort to keep people in contamination zones while cleaning up evidence. We need to get this information to the silent watchers, I said. How? Jake asked. We can't exactly travel in this radiation, and our radio setup isn't powerful enough to reach the capital. The transmission station, I said. KQD might be off the air, but the equipment is still there. If we could get to it, 15 miles through radioactive ash? Helen interrupted. You'd be dead before you made it halfway. She was right. My spouse was already showing symptoms. I could feel the exhaustion creeping through my own system. Surface travel through the fallout zone was suicide. But maybe suicide was better than waiting to die slowly, while General Cade's cover-up teams erased every trace of what had happened here. The radio crackled again. This time, Jake brought the handheld unit upstairs so we could all hear. Silent watchers calling all stations. We have confirmation of coordinated strikes against 7 major population centers. Official casualty figures are being suppressed. Military units are conducting what appears to be forced relocation of contaminated civilians to undisclosed facilities. Repeat, this is not a natural disaster or technical malfunction. This is a deliberate action by elements within our own military command structure. The transmission cut off. Dead air, then the familiar loop of General Cade's reassuring lies. 7 cities, Maya whispered. Forced relocation, Earl added. Elements within our own military, my spouse finished. We sat there in the plastic-wrapped farmhouse, breathing filtered air and listening to the Geiger counter's steady clicking, while the scope of the betrayal settled in. This wasn't just about us or our city, or even our region. This was a coordinated operation to deliberately contaminate millions of American civilians and then cover it up. We have to try, I said finally. Even if we don't make it, someone has to try to get the truth out. Earl stood up. Not you, he said. You're both showing symptoms. You'd collapse before you got 5 miles. Then who? Me and Jake. We've got the least exposure so far. We can take the truck, drive as far as the roads are passable, then go on foot if we have to. That's suicide, Helen said. Maybe, but doing nothing is definitely suicide. For all of us, and for everyone else who doesn't know what's really happening. The debate that followed was quiet but intense. Helen arguing for staying put and hoping for rescue. Maya pointing out that rescue might come in the form of General Cade's collection teams. Jake insisting that someone had to take the risk. Earl quietly making practical plans for a journey through radioactive wasteland. In the end, it was Lily who decided it. She looked up from her coloring book and said, Grandpa, are you going to help the other people? Yes, sweetheart. I'm going to try. Good, she said, and went back to coloring. Adults needed complex justifications for heroism. Children just needed to know someone was still fighting. Earl and Jake left at dawn, taking the farm truck loaded with water, batteries, and a portable ham radio. They also took the Geiger counter over Helen's objections. If they were going to die of radiation exposure, they at least wanted to know when it was happening. The rest of us stayed behind to monitor their progress and maintain the house's improvised life support. Helen and Maya worked constantly, changing filters, checking seals, rationing food and water with the grim efficiency of people preparing for a siege. My spouse and I waited, watched our symptoms progress, tried not to think about what acute radiation syndrome looked like in its final stages. The last transmission we received came from Earl 16 hours after they'd left us. Weak signal, heavy static, but his voice cut through clear enough. Made it. Equipment still works, broadcasting all frequencies. Helen pressed the radio closer to her ear, tears streaming down her face. Tell Helen, love her forever. Tell Lily be good for. Silent watchers, this is Farmhouse Station broadcasting emergency traffic. General Cade's forces targeted 7 cities with coordinated nuclear strikes. The casualty numbers being reported are fabricated. Collection points are concentration camps for human experimentation. The official emergency broadcasts are deliberate disinformation designed to keep civilians in radiation zones. This is not an accident. This is mass murder disguised as technical failure. Silent watchers, if you're receiving this, the coordinates for survivor locations are. Static consumed the signal. We waited hours for Earl's voice to return, but the emergency frequency fell silent. Jake never came back either. Neither did Earl. My spouse died 2 days after we reached the farmhouse. Peacefully, if you can call massive organ failure peaceful. Helen held their hand while I whispered things that probably couldn't be heard over the sound of failing lungs. I wanted to bury them outside, but the soil was too contaminated. Instead, we wrapped the body in plastic sheeting and stored it in the barn with the other casualties that had accumulated since the ash started falling. 5 people, including a child about Lily's age whose parents had brought them to the farmhouse too late for our improvised medical care to make any difference. The Geiger counter kept clicking. The ash kept falling. The official broadcasts had finally stopped, but real help seemed as distant as the transmission station that Earl and Jake had never actually reached. When the soldiers in full radiation gear finally came for us, they weren't collection teams. They were rescue teams, working from lists of missing persons and last known addresses. They had medical equipment, decontamination facilities, and most importantly, they had orders to save lives rather than collect specimens. "How did you find us?" Helen asked as they prepared us for transport to a real medical facility. Anonymous broadcast 3 days ago, the medic said through his face shield. Someone broke into the KQD transmission station and sent out detailed coordinates for survivor locations. Probably saved hundreds of lives. Earl's final gift. His last act of rebellion against General Cade's cover-up. They told us later that General Cade had been arrested. Court-martial proceedings. Congressional investigations. The full story coming out slowly, carefully, with the kind of thoroughness that democracy demands when it discovers cancer in its own body. 7 cities. 43,000 dead. 300,000 more suffering various degrees of radiation poisoning. All of it deliberately inflicted by a cabal of military officers who believed they were conducting necessary research into civilian response to nuclear terrorism. Necessary research. That's what they called it. Helen and Maya are still fighting their own battles with cancer. Little Lily seems healthy so far, but radiation damage can take years to manifest. I'm writing this from a hospital room where I'm receiving experimental treatment for radiation-induced organ damage. The doctors are optimistic, but optimism and medicine aren't the same thing. The truth got out eventually. The cover-up failed. General Cade and his co-conspirators are facing life sentences in military prison. But Earl and Jake are still dead. My spouse is still dead. 43,000 people are still dead. And somewhere in a Pentagon filing cabinet, there's probably a report analyzing the effectiveness of using American citizens as test subjects for nuclear warfare scenarios. Marked classified. Stamped with General Cade's authorization. Necessary research. The ash stopped falling months ago, but I can still taste metal in my mouth. I can still hear the clicking of those scattered Geiger counters in the rail yard, electronic requiems for the invisible death that surrounded us. Sometimes, late at night in this hospital room, I wonder if we actually won anything. The truth came out, justice was served, the system worked. But the next time someone wants to conduct necessary research, they'll just do it better. More carefully, with better cover stories and more sophisticated lies. The ash will fall somewhere else on someone else, and the official broadcasts will assure them that everything is under control. Stay in your homes. Proceed to designated safe zones. The situation is fully contained. Help is coming. Help is always coming. Until it isn't.